Welcome to another episode of the Vets in Real Estate Podcast, where I'm joined by another veteran that is turned real estate professional. It's going to tell his story about what life is like during that transition and after. Larry, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Will, for having me. It's a pleasure to be on your
Yeah,
podcast.
appreciate it. So tell us, what did you do in the service? You got a little bit of an interesting twist, is what I understand.
Yeah, so I started off in the U.S. Navy. I entered it. I entered the Navy wanting to do like computer design and graphics stuff like that. I at the time had a cousin who was married to a contractor, and he was making about 600,000 a year. And I was like, well, I mean, that sounds nice, right? So got into the military, and as we all find out, those recruiters are very truthful at what they are putting out for the job description, and ended up getting into IT desktop service. So, yeah, so I found myself doing desktop management, database management, which helped me in my career. And then a short time later, I joined the Army. Um, Through what they call, the Blue to Green program, and ended up being in 11 Bravo for the Army National Guard. But after that, when I was after I completed that, I was sent to be a recruiter in Hobbs, New Mexico. So I got my first taste of the oil field and stuff from Hobbs, New Mexico.
So you went from IT to infantry to recruit. That is an interesting that's an interesting transition, maybe just within the service, as well as going from Navy to Army
Yeah,
National Guard. Was there
yeah.
anything that you noticed just between the two branches altogether, which is a complete culture shock?
Well, I'll tell you that their whole structure was a complete culture shock for me, obviously. I mean, the ranking and, specialties weren't a shock, but just it was much different. I mean, they treated their enlisted men with more responsibility, and they were given a little bit more respect. Sergeants obviously had more respect than a traditional E5 would have had in the Navy. The reason why I went to recruiting is because obviously they felt like I could communicate to the other soldiers about getting into the military, and they felt that my best purpose would be to do that.
Yeah, you made that transition from IT into infantry, into recruiting, but it wasn't necessarily right into real estate after that. You had a little bit of a gap before you jump into real estate.
Yeah, so let me explain why I got into the military. I got into the military obviously to serve my country and get the college degree tuition assistance. And so, however, just before I headed to Sicily, 9/11 occurred. And so when I got to Sicily, it was already, Threat Delta, and I had this overwhelming feeling to serve in a capacity that would actually get me out into the front lines and protect my brothers and sisters, right? So that was my whole 4 years in the Navy. That's all I kept thinking about. I wasn't athletic enough, in my opinion, to go Navy SEALs or do any of the special forces. So, but I could go and do combat. So I was thinking about that the whole time. Ended up and finally doing it into like an Army National Guard role, which turned active when I started recruiting. And then after the recruiting time, I was expected to get a billet, somewhere in Washington serving a colonel. And I just decided, I wanted to get into combat. I couldn't get into combat. I already had three kids at the time after that. And I was working a job as well on top of the full-time recruiting job in with a company called Enrichment Technology, which surprisingly does uranium enrichment in in New Mexico. Um, so I'm in Hobbs, New Mexico, working out of Eunice, New Mexico. Found myself upside down, exiting the military with a brand new house and three children, and I wanted to see what I could do in the area. So found that my skills in IT were not being paid accordingly in the area. And so found myself, and I'm missing a little bit of the history there because it really doesn't matter. I found myself in the oil field, um, working for Halliburton, and that's how
Mm.
I started to develop my oil and gas knowledge. So I started at Halliburton. I was working as a just basically a hand, which is just a brand new recruit into the oil and gas industry on the completion side, which is to say that I was doing fracking in the area, and started from the bottom. Ended up going through a supervisor program that was aimed at pushing guys that had degrees or were getting degrees to get into leadership, and so ended up doing that. Was one of three that completed it in my area, and I became a supervisor for Halliburton. And after Halliburton, I during Halliburton, I realized that large oil field corporations typically, when they have to cut staffing, usually don't have the time to sit down and see who knows what. They just cut a complete crew, and instead of utilizing all the talent out of that crew and moving it over to other crews, they just terminated a crew. And so that got me to thinking that maybe I should set my sights out for additional roles or roles that pay me a little bit better. Because if it wasn't about, excuse me, security in the oil field, and large organizations really didn't manage people, they just managed numbers. I thought, well, then I don't necessarily have to be married to one company, and which I would have had I not seen that happen, right? And so then I applied for a company called Performance Technologies in San Antonio, Texas, to be a supervisor for their newly formed frac fleet. Their frac fleet was designated to serve Aubrey McClendon's Chesapeake Energy as a vertically integrated frac fleet. And so got the job. That's a whole nother story as well. I was supposed to have 5 years experience. At this time I had two. I'm a big believer in the Lord, and so just felt like God was giving me an option to be over there in San Antonio. So spent a lot of time with Performance Technologies. We were bought out by Patterson Drilling, and I became a part of Universal Pressure Pumping. In that time, I worked my way up from a supervisor to assistant operations manager, and then during a downturn in 2015, I noticed that we were, terminating, frac fleets as well, doing the same thing, right?
Hmm.
We just needed to cut staffing. And so I started questioning where our sales guys were. I've never spent a day in sales, okay, up until this point, and was told basically that's not my lane, just worry about being in operations. But I had a hard time laying off people. And so I started going out on my own to E&P companies, which E&P companies is just a fancy term for exploration and production companies. They're the big drillers, Chevron,
Hmm.
Exxon, etc. So went to EOG, which was a large E&P company in South Texas. Told them about our situation, gave them our qualities and what we prided ourselves in, and before you knew it, we won a fleet back to work. And so from that point on, I was asked to then be in executive sales, which I did for another, almost 5 years in the oil and gas industry. And then in 2019, I won't get into the politics of oil and gas. That's a whole nother thing. But I will say that I got to a point where I was pitching companies on specific, items they wanted us to pitch on. But at the end of the day, it was about bottom dollar for, the production companies, the E&P companies. So I was just getting burnt out. And from a young age, my background is that my two parents are extremely poor or were extremely poor. My mom to this day, is surviving on our substance, our sustenance, our provision for her care. And so I started at an early age, around 11, trying to figure out what the difference is between people who have, money and people who don't. And obviously I was 11 years old, so I didn't understand that. But one of the recurring themes that I found over the years about reading on successful people and entrepreneurs is that they held a lot of real estate, or they started in real estate and then moved on, or continued to hold and sought after other ventures. And so I knew that somehow, some way, I had to get into real estate. Fast forward to 2015 when there was a downturn in the oil field on my performance technologies. I had just barely started, in sales. And I thought to myself, if something happens, I should probably have a backup, right? And so that got me thinking about real estate again. And in San Antonio, they have a school called Champion School of Real Estate. So I went down there, got some education on that, what it would take for me to go through it, and spent about, I believe, 6 weeks going through night school after work, and ended up finishing my the schooling and getting my license in real estate. Just after I completed that, however, we started getting busy again, and I started winning more deals for the company. So I shelved the license, and continued on with oil and gas. In 2019, I got super burnt out by what I was trying to pitch, and understanding that, these E&P companies, they only cared about the bottom line or the bottom dollar. And I shouldn't just broadly stroke them like that. I would say that the people that I was talking to at the time, um, were mostly concerned about the final invoice
Mhm.
number. So, just got burnt out, and saw a post on LinkedIn from a broker that I used to work with, and just reached out to him and said, "Hey man, I have about, 10,000 contacts in my phone. About 80% of them are decision makers. I've developed this over a 10-year career. Would you guys be interested in, training somebody who has a license but doesn't have any experience in the real estate world?" This company was a small company in a tertiary market in the Permian Basin, and I didn't find this out till later, but they were one of the premier groups in this area. And so, a small boutique, but had great footprint in this area. So I reached out, had an interview with the vice president and with the owner, and they immediately brought me on. And excuse me, I started in January of 2020. So what does that tell you? Yeah,
Yeah, fun time to start. Yes.
yeah, fun time to start. And actually, I'm very grateful for that time period to start. So January happens, I get sick. I'm sick with COVID, but I don't realize that until March. And then everything shuts down, right? The first thing I did was think to myself, man, I made a wrong decision, you know? And I think that, that was just fear at the time. I was making really good money in executive sales, over six figures, and, just felt like I made kind of a bad decision that I didn't realize was going to be bad until the time happened. However, I ran into a developer who had a lot of clients and a lot of open buildings during that time. And everybody was starting to shut down. The oil prices started to go into the negatives. And so I was asked, if you want to, see what you can do, take this one building. If you lease it, we'll give you the rest of our buildings. Um, had no clue what I was doing. Still brand new. The broker at the time was trying to train me as much as possible, but he was based out of DFW, and then they could not no longer travel due to COVID.
COVID.
So I basically learned by trial and error, and additionally, by drinking out of a fire hydrant. I started having to take around the clients for my president and the vice president because they weren't traveling. So I get this gentleman on my own. He tells me to, see what I can do with this one building. I ended up leasing that building, and then leasing seven more buildings for him, and getting the majority of his clients from that point forward. And, fast forward, 5 years, I am now the owner of my own brokerage group, IWI Realty, playing in the same sandbox in Permian Basin. And, very thankful for that COVID year, as I was able to lease properties, sell properties, and have to do so with outside the box thinking.
Yeah. So I'm curious because most of the people we get are usually from bigger metro areas, but you
Right.
were, going to Midland, Odessa, you know, tens of brokerages, right? I mean, you don't have the massive, like we do here in San Antonio where there's thousands of them. How did you think, especially even the commercial side? I mean, was it just that was the only choice to go to, or was it just kind of you knew what it was, or you knew who they were, and that's why you went, or
No,
what did
no,
that process look like for that first brokerage?
super random. Like I wish now, I say this, but I still would have made the same choice, even if I
Hmm.
knew. I didn't understand anything about the brokerage world. I didn't
Hmm.
understand anything about the CBREs or the JLLs, or the Marcus and Millichaps. I had no clue about those brokerage groups. What I did know is that I had been on a roller coaster ride with companies that were smaller or just had started, and I had a lot of experience in that arena with just with companies that were just starting off the bat. This company wasn't newly formed, but at that time they were about 5 6 years in. Okay,
Okay.
and so um, I felt like this was a fit because of the previous experience. I was going to be you know dealing with the decision makers of the company on a daily basis. I would be able to learn, from them on multiple levels, not just, leasing and selling, but, net lease deals. Um,
Hmm.
in addition to that, just how they run their company. And so I did not do any due diligence on anybody else.
Hmm.
And this is where I would say that if somebody wants to get into a specific real estate, niche, first understand your niche, right? So I'm in the industrial side, doing retail as well now, but I was initially only doing industrial, and that was due to the fact that I had an oil field background of 10 years, right? So I understood the lingo. This specific company was aiming their industrial properties to the same people I was talking to in oil and gas, the CEOs, the CFOs, the procurement managers, the real estate directors, which at the time I was not talking to, but similar to a CFO in that position. So it was not a hard transition in the fact that I was contacting the same people just
Hmm.
with a different product, which, by the way, which with the product they actually wanted to hear
They
about.
wanted to talk about,
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, if they need a property, they want to hear from you. I was contending with 10 to 15 other frat companies for the attention of one person, and oftentimes you didn't even get an opportunity to talk to them because they were so inundated with other sales guys, not just in one side, but all the sides of oil and gas, which many people don't realize that is a multi-dimensional, uh, you know, uh, product. I mean, it's
Yeah.
there are many service companies servicing one well. Most people don't understand that one well is probably 20 to 22 service companies that are servicing that particular well. And these gentlemen have tons of wells. So, anyways, yeah, I did not look up brokerage groups. I did not look up my niche. I just understood that I had industrial real estate experience by the fact that I was in it like every day.
Yeah.
So, um, yeah, I would suggest that anybody that's looking at getting into the real estate first understand their niche. What do they like to do? When I got my license, I initially wanted to do multi-million dollar homes just because my mindset was, I need to break the ceiling that I'm currently at. One of the things that also pushed me to do something different than, executive sales in oil and gas was I would look over at my other partners that were doing the same thing. And no matter if they, um, made as many sales as me or not, we were getting the same hourly pay, same yearly structure. The only difference was bonuses. And that really kind of got under my skin. I was and I am someone that does, a lot of work. I
Hmm.
do not like to be stagnant, and I, conjure up work if I feel like I'm stagnant. And so I feel like I was hitting a ceiling with everybody else who was who may or may not have been working as hard as me, right? And that was another reason why I transitioned over. But definitely, I would suggest that anybody understand their niche, understand the different companies in their area, and then understand the different companies nationally. Because if you have a desire to be in kind of the executive world of real estate, you probably want to go with a large firm and understand it from the bottom up. Wouldn't you agree, Will?
Yeah, I would absolutely.
Yeah. So, I mean, I didn't start there. I started with a group that was, running and gunning. And so while I gained some tools that probably most first and second year, um, you know, real estate agents don't get, I also didn't get the initial, start from the bottom to learn, specific ways to, multiply my knowledge by just taking a full step-by-step progression. My progression was kind of all over the place and having to learn, all at once or in different areas. And that kind of fractured my learning at the beginning, even though I was doing very well. So, if you are able to manage your time, manage yourself, um, manage your production levels, then I say go for a smaller firm if you're looking for that run and gun style. But if you're looking to come up traditionally and then maybe be a president of a large corporation or be a multinational regional director, you definitely want to go up through a traditional brokerage group that is larger and has the capacity to do that.
And now those larger groups are easier to find in the big cities, but in kind of the Permian Basin, do y'all have a big presence of a CBRE or JLL or any of those larger kind of corporate style real estate companies?
Oh, they're here, and they
Right.
represent large companies in the area. But when I say here, I mean they work out of here, and they typically work through the smaller companies because we're a
Hmm.
tertiary market. However, the Permian Basin provides over 50% of all the oil in the world to the United States. Our little
Sure.
area here, the amount of money in this area is unbelievable. I believe the average net income for households is around 64,000, and around the Midland Odessa area, it's around 120, 130,000.
Right.
So that's average.
Yeah.
A lot of development going on here. We recently got our first Costco, 180,000 square feet, one of the biggest in Texas. And there's a lot of database and AI data
Hmm.
centers that are going on around the area. So the opportunity to learn on multi fronts is here, but specifically to these large groups, they don't have a presence here as per se as like a brick and mortar
Right.
location, but they do utilize third parties like myself. Or they deal with them directly. I've gone up against CBRE, JLL, Marcus and Millichap a
Yeah.
lot of my career.
I think that's the one interesting thing, especially in the commercial world, if you're in a tertiary market, is because sometimes those other firms are not necessarily your competitor, but they're actually your partner. Because we do a lot we're in San Antonio, but we still cover Corpus. We'll do a lot of work, even for some of the larger brokers that don't have a presence. We'll get the phone call, and they much rather give it to somebody who's a boutique versus somebody who's the actual competitor, at that big national level, which kind of change the way you market a little bit, right? You're going after customers, but now the other brokerages that just aren't in your market are a good source of income for you.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, I love to help the big groups out, and it's smart of them to do so, like you said, to have the local knowledge of what's going on. These guys, they're dealing in larger numbers and larger clients. They often don't have the time to really evaluate, what's going on locally. In their own markets, they do, and I'm sure that um, they corner that area. But here in the tertiary markets, like you explained, it's very hard for them to come out here when, they could just co-broker with an agent such as myself,
Yeah.
get the local lay of the land, provide them the information, help show the properties to, or the tenants to different properties. So it's very lucrative for the small boutique, and it's a great way to meet the larger groups and cooperate with whatever they're doing.
Yeah. So now that you have your own company, you've got agents with you as well. What
Yeah.
have you noticed? And I believe a couple of them are veterans as well. What have you
Right.
seen in that transition from them into commercial real estate? What has been maybe some of the things that they excel at and some of the things that they may struggle with in that transition?
Yeah, very good question. So I myself struggled with these things as well. As we come out of the military, it's, especially if you have um, wanted to be a good soldier or a good seaman or whatever it was your profession, you learn to take orders and do them well, right? And one of the things that I had to get out of when I came here is that not everything is black and white. we tend to stick to things, ask for direction, and then move forward in that one direction. And if we encounter a roadblock, typically we're able to think around it. But if our line of thinking is directly in front of us, it's because that's what we've been giving it, a task. Do this task, get it done. You know as well as I do, Will, that when you run into a particular problem in real estate, the answer could be, anywhere in this 360-degree circle that sits around, the property for solutions. So one of the things I had to get out of my mindset was that it doesn't always have to be done one way, right? There are multiple ways to tackle problems in the real estate world, and it's just a matter of knowing what is available to you within the guidelines that you have. And so that was one thing that I struggle with, that I see some of my guys struggle with, is that when they encounter a roadblock, they will attempt to use their knowledge to go around that roadblock, but it's only within a certain parameter. You have to get them to open up their minds that everything isn't black or white, right? There's some gray areas. There's some areas out there that you don't realize you can do in specific situations. Certain niche real estate components don't have as many, opportunities to think outside the box. Residential being one of those. But in the industrial commercial world, there's many ways to get a deal done without, a through Z process.
No.
The other thing that my guys struggled with is, just finding the answers on their own. And that was my issue as well. From the military, we're used to, picking up SOPs. There's very strict documents that you need to abide by. And while we have those same rules here in Texas, as we abide by the, TREC guidelines and rules and responsibilities. Um, you know, there are other ways to find the information that you need. And if you're not finding it in a particular spot, you just have to go out and find it. Certain large groups like JLL, CBRE may have cornered that, have a database that you can go to, but a lot of the boutique companies, still don't have that in a large database. It's traditionally just you go find the answer and you come back to me and we'll figure out if that's correct or not. So, a lot of the military guys will struggle with that because they expect that there to be specific places that they can go and get the information. And if it's not there, it's like, well, why isn't it here? Why can't I get it? So,
So those are definitely things that as we've heard from other guests, I think are some of the similar struggles, the lack of structure that real estate brings, especially come from the military.
right.
What are some of the things that you think that veterans excel at, especially in industrial real estate?
Yeah, in industrial real estate, it's going to sound contradictory, but at the same time, the vets don't quit. You know what I mean? Even if they're hitting their head on a door for days and days and days, they just won't quit. And I think that's what makes a good agent for whoever you're representing. We have a do not quit attitude. We have an attitude that says, it may not seem like a way, there may not seem like a way now, but I guarantee you there's a way. And until we hit that finality that there is not a solution, they'll continue to do so, which is great for a client who may have had some representation in the past where it felt like they had to like guide the agent.
Yeah. What I think is interesting too is that I think so much of our experience from the military is industrial. So I
Yeah.
think in that transition, and that's what I laughed at. I remember getting stuck going to the unit movement officers course. 2 weeks, mad because that meant I had to work later when it came to deployments. I was just hated the fact that I got stuck with that school, hated the fact that I had, all the things that went along with it, right?
Yeah.
I'm out there doing my very first industrial deal. It's a rail spurred opportunity, and we're sitting there all of a sudden talking about where's the best place for the train to go and the car to go and all that. And I was like, oh, wait, I actually speak. We're about cranes, we're about forklift. Like it was one of those very quickly. I was like, I actually know how to do this job. This is
Yeah.
amazing. And to me, that was always fascinating. It was a job that an additional duty that I was mad I got stuck with,
Yeah,
was actually one of the things that actually transitioned to better, even driving, the 18 wheelers in the military.
right.
There's too many times when I walk in looking at a building, I'm like, yeah, this is a terrible layout. Like, I couldn't park this. So there's, half your guys probably wouldn't be able to park it either. Or if I could park it, all your guys should be able to park it just fine, knowing that I was a terrible truck driver. There's so many of those things that do transition that I don't think we think of while we're in the service, that who would have thought a 2 week class, 5, 6 years beforehand would have been one of those catalysts to get me further in the industry.
That's a very great point, Will. A lot of our training we don't realize will carry over. You mentioned the 18-wheeler training, even land nav, understanding the layout of the land and where that particular property lies in versus the company's desire to be closer to their clients. A lot of that stuff can be transitioned over. And I think for me, I got the double, feeding where the oil field, I think, is one of the closest to military operations as far as like camaraderie is concerned,
Mm.
that you can get yourself into. Oil field operations, you're sitting with 12 to 14 guys going out to a location for your particular service company. You're working all day with them. You're spending a lot of time out there, and then you develop these relationships that I only experienced in the military as well. And the fact that a lot of them are prior military just shows you that that is an equivalent, working area for most of our military transitioning vets. So if you have done a lot of industrial, I recommend you continue in that same line of work if you've in the military. If you are looking at specifically energy, and wanting to do the double niche of having industrial in the energy world, I recommend going to the oil field first, spending some time learning, about the various trades there, and then getting into the industrial world. Because as you said, one of the best ways we can help our clients is by understanding our own limitations within what they're doing, which translate to the limitations of their personnel as well.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think that's one of the things as we see agents transition for the service or even into real estate, not coming from service, is their understanding of their client and understanding the client's needs, whether you're selling luxury residential and understanding the needs of that client, if you're first time home buyers, or you're doing, office or industrial retail or whatever in between.
Sure.
Your ability to understand that client's needs and think of the things that they're not thinking of at that time makes all the difference. There's too many times when they're like, we love the space, what about X, Y, and Z? Oh, yeah, that might be something to think about, where they were in love with the space until they thought through problems that would have come up 6 months, a year down the line, and realized it was going to be a terrible space for them.
No, that's exactly right. You want to make sure that you're out in front of your clients discussing things they normally wouldn't consider. There's a lot more things than just location and the price point per square foot that they should consider. Oftentimes they don't. And a lot of our schooling in the military gets us to think, beyond just what's the foundation of this particular problem. It's what are the intricate problems within the problems. And so I felt like my military training helped me there because I was able to dissect things at a different level than most people who were just looking at the outside issues. So
Yeah. So if you were to sit back and look at it all over again,
mm,
what would you, obviously every lesson had some value, but what was it that you would probably do differently or look at maybe a little bit differently if you were sitting back as, Sergeant Nielsen so many years ago, looking to make this transition, knowing that real estate was the end goal? What would you have done differently?
yeah, so I would have started reading about real estate in my particular niche a long
Mm-hmm.
time before that. While I was, doing whatever I was doing, I served some time in Sicily. I had a lot of off time. If I could have looked back now, I would say, hey, spend a lot of time understanding industrial real estate, commercial real estate, and get, involved with some classes, at the head of, that. I would also try to understand like my schooling. So what a lot of people don't know, but you and I know, is that when you're going through schooling for real estate to get your license, it is 90%, geared toward residential. And
Mm-hmm.
so a lot of the stuff that you are learning is not going to be applicable to what you're going to do if you're doing something outside that. Um, in addition to that, getting into the larger groups almost requires you to know somebody in the inside to help you get in. So I would be calling beforehand to the particular groups that I'm interested in, talking to them, getting to know how they interview and what the process is and what I need to get together prior to that so that can get in. Additionally, I would have been asking them, what kind of networking events, what kind of, books would you recommend that I read? Do you guys have in-house books, or training that I may start on if you don't mind? Just whatever you could find to ask them about your particular niche, I would start doing it ahead of time.
Man.
And honestly, I would start looking at all of them and deciding, what fits your passion. I was very passionate and still am about the oil and gas industry. I believe it's a critical industry to America's infrastructure and our security. And so being a small part of that, first in the oil field, and then second to help oil field companies find their particular location to service their clients, has given me a profound, sense of, belonging to a larger structure.
Yeah. That's great advice. So you mentioned going back and reading and doing more. What would be those books you would recommend somebody to sit down and start picking up while they're in service?
Well, the one that comes to mind right off the top of my is Keller Williams' book, The Millionaire Real Estate Agent.
This one right here.
Yeah. That was one of the first books I read and, gave me some pointers on, how to make, signs and listings and stuff work for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that book, was a big inspiration for me right off the bat. I started implementing some of the tactics that they mentioned in the book, and it was 100% sound advice.
Yeah. And what I like about that book, even though it's geared towards a residential agent,
Yeah,
the whole focus is about building the system, building the process, building your team out in such a way that is scalable and buildable. So even if you're on the commercial side,
yeah,
yeah, it's going to talk about, send postcards to 100 houses, you'll get two or whatever the stat is. It's going to talk about those things, but the idea is that you're doing something, it's measurable and going from there. So I agree. I think MREA is a great book for anybody that's new to understand systems, whether you like those systems or not. It's definitely one of the industry changing books I think that's out there.
yeah. And the other one is by Keller Williams as well, The Millionaire Real Estate Investor.
Investor, yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, there's those books. There's I don't know if you have heard of exchange groups. Real estate exchange groups, but
Hmm.
those are solid groups for information on how to think outside the box and get deals done in a different way. I recommend, learning about those groups and what they accomplish, just to see a different side of doing real estate deals. There was a ton that I have read, and I'd have to get up and look at my bookcase to give you the actual one. Those stick out most importantly to my progression.
Yeah. Well, Larry, I appreciate your time. If anybody had questions or wanted to reach back out to you, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Appreciate that. I'd love everybody to check out my website, iwirealty.com. You can email me at Larry, Larry, at iwirealty.com. My phone number is 432-260-0088. If you want to give me a call, love to talk to veterans about transitioning and helping them transition to the real estate world. And that's it.
Yeah. Larry, thank you so much for your time. And for those of you that were watching, if you found value in this one, obviously comment, give a like, share it to somebody you think who would. And of course, as these come out on social media, feel free to engage and share those and send those out there as well. Larry, thank you again so much for your time.
Thank you, Will. Happy have a good day and a week.
You too.